Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I want to talk about a major move by the United States. They have imposed sweeping sanctions on two of Russia's biggest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, following the collapse of talks with President Putin. This is a significant step aimed at cutting off key sources of revenue for Russia's war efforts in Ukraine. The sanctions are designed to freeze U.S. based assets of these companies and prevent U.S. individuals or businesses from engaging with them, sending a strong message that the U.S. expects tangible progress toward peace. The sanctions come after a planned summit between Trump and Putin in Budapest failed to produce results. U.S. officials expressed frustration, noting that discussions did not translate into concrete action toward a ceasefire. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent highlighted that the lack of serious engagement left Washington with little choice but to impose these measures. The U.S. sees targeting Russia's major oil companies as one of the most effective ways to pressure Moscow economically while trying to encourage diplomatic solutions. Rosneft and Lukoil are massive entities in Russia's energy sector, accounting for a significant portion of oil production. By cutting off access to international financial systems and key markets, the U.S. aims to diminish the Kremlin's ability to fund military operations. The sanctions also have a psychological effect, signaling to Russia and the world that the U.S. is willing to take concrete action when diplomacy stalls. Markets reacted quickly, with stock values of both companies plunging and crude oil prices experiencing volatility as global investors reassessed risks. From Moscow's perspective, the sanctions are serious but not catastrophic. President Putin framed them as hostile, emphasizing that Russia would not yield to external pressure. At the same time, he warned of potential global consequences, including disruptions to energy markets. The Russian government maintains that it has other avenues to sustain its economy, and that dialogue is always preferable to confrontation. However, the sanctions clearly increase the cost of international trade for Russian oil, particularly affecting transactions with Western financial institutions. Global responses vary. Major consumers of Russian oil, including China and India, are reevaluating their dealings with Rosneft and Lukoil to avoid secondary sanctions. This recalibration could shift trade flows and impact global energy supply. Some international companies are divesting from Russian assets to reduce exposure, signaling the broad influence of U.S. policy on private sector decisions. Lukoil, for example, is reportedly selling off international assets, such as refineries and fuel stations, to mitigate risk. The strategy behind these sanctions is twofold: to weaken Russia's war financing capabilities and to encourage Moscow to reconsider its approach to the conflict in Ukraine. Analysts caution that the effectiveness depends on strict enforcement and international cooperation. Without global alignment, Russia might find alternative routes to sell oil and generate revenue, lessening the impact. The situation is complex because economic sanctions can have wide-reaching effects on global energy prices, trade, and diplomatic relations. For Ukraine and its allies, the sanctions are seen as a positive development, creating tangible pressure on Russia. However, for the wider world, particularly energy importing nations, the implications are more complicated. Increased oil prices and supply chain disruptions could have broader economic consequences. Policymakers and markets are watching closely to see whether these sanctions force meaningful changes in Russian policy or simply entrench existing positions. The global oil market is particularly sensitive. Since the announcement, Brent and WTI crude prices surged, reflecting concerns about potential supply disruptions. Energy analysts suggest that prolonged sanctions could create a short-term supply deficit, impacting prices further. At the same time, companies that rely on Russian oil are seeking alternatives, which may restructure trade flows and reshape global energy dynamics. Enforcement of sanctions is critical. The U.S. has warned of penalties not just for American entities, but also for foreign companies that engage with the sanctioned Russian firms. This raises the stakes for international trade and increases pressure on global financial institutions. Some lawmakers in the U.S. are also pushing for additional measures, such as the Sanctioning Russia Act of 2025, which would impose stricter penalties on countries that continue purchasing Russian energy, further tightening the economic squeeze. The geopolitical ramifications are significant. By taking this step, the U.S. signals a readiness to escalate economic pressure rather than relying solely on diplomacy. This could either bring Russia back to the negotiating table or harden its stance. For Ukraine, the sanctions represent support and validation of its fight, while for Russia, they underscore the cost of continued aggression. The international community must carefully balance enforcement with the risk of broader economic disruptions. The sanctions also affect corporate strategies. Lukoil's decision to divest international assets is a direct response to the changing business environment. Other companies may follow suit to reduce exposure to risk. The flow of Russian oil to global markets is likely to be altered, with buyers seeking to avoid potential legal and financial consequences of dealing with sanctioned entities. In conclusion, the U.S. sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil are a calculated move aimed at pressuring Russia, both economically and diplomatically. They are designed to limit the Kremlin's war financing while signaling global resolve. The effectiveness of these measures depends on rigorous enforcement, international cooperation, and the response from Russia and its allies. The situation remains fluid, and the impact on global markets, energy supplies, and international relations will unfold over time. These developments are a reminder of the interconnectedness of geopolitics, economics, and energy, highlighting the high stakes involved in modern international policy. Thanks for watching and following this breakdown. Share your thoughts in the comments on whether you think these sanctions will lead to real change in Russia's approach, or if they will simply escalate tensions further.